Wake up everyone, I'm Sleepy, and today I'm bringing you a no-nonsense video tutorial on how to set up a DayZ server. This will be a vanilla server, so we will not be adding mods or customizing specific files, but I have released a video alongside this one that covers that subject. You can check out the link in the description. Let's dive right in. Alright, so the first thing we're going to need to do is download and install our DayZ server. So if we head over to Steam, we can search for our DayZ server, but you won't find it in this list unless you highlight your tools. So under this drop down button right here, we're going to highlight our tools so that we can see the DayZ server, and here it is right here. So all we need to do is install this. Pick your drive and install. Alright, now that we have downloaded and installed our DayZ server, we need to locate the files that it has downloaded. So if we go over to our library list and right click on our DayZ server, go to Manage and Browse Local Files. This will launch a file explorer in the root directory of our server. For now, you don't have to pay attention to these files and folders. We're going to come back later with a detailed explanation. Right now we're just going to move this folder, and the reason why we move it from this directory is because when DayZ pushes updates, they overwrite the values in these files and folders. And if we make changes to these files and folders, it will overwrite our changes. So we move this folder to a new directory to keep this from happening. So we will go up one folder, and we are going to right click and copy this DayZ server. For me, I'm just going to put it down on my desktop. You can put this anywhere. We'll just have to find, you'll have a different path than I do. My path will be to my desktop. Your path will be to wherever you placed your folder. So let's plop it down on here. All right, now that it is downloaded, moved over to our desktop, we can open it up. And if your file is in a different location, your path will be different, but to find your path to your server, you are going to open your file explorer where we are right now. We're going to click this folder right here, and it will extend that name. That right there is your absolute path to your server. We're going to need to make sure we can find this periodically because we're going to need it to reference this folder. Our DayZ server does not work out of the box, unfortunately. So this means if you were to click this exe right here, or our application file, it will try to launch the server without its proper configurations. Let's take a look. And server config not found, termination. So the reason why it's doing this is because it needs launch parameters. A launch parameter is a value that's fed into the server before it launches in order to configure it properly. And DayZ has provided us with the launch parameters that our server needs. We just have to plug it in. So how do we do this? Well, we're going to need to create a batch script. So what is a batch script? Well, a batch script is a way for us to talk to our Windows computer. It's a coding language that allows us to carry out a specific task. In our case, the task is to launch the DayZ server with the correct parameters. But we also want to check back periodically to make sure that the server's running, and if it's not, then we're going to want to restart that. So how do we do this? Well, we're going to add a new text file. Or right click, go to new, and text document. We're going to name this server start, because that's what it does. Right now you may not be able to see these file extensions. If you cannot, just go to view and click file name extensions. And now we can edit this extension, because right now this extension says it's a text file denoted by txt. So we will need to change this to a batch file, and this will be denoted by BAT. We'll hit enter. Are you sure you want to make this change? Yes, we are sure. Right now this file is empty, so your computer will not recognize it, and that will pop up if you try to run it. So how do we put text in here? Well, by default you can edit this with Notepad, but I highly recommend everyone download a code editor. It will save you a lot of headache in the long run. I use Visual Studio Code because it is a free and lightweight, easy to use code editor, and it does generally what I need it to do. So I'll give you guys a second if you want to stop this video and download and install this program, because this is what I'll be using moving forward. Alright, so let's open up our Visual Studio Code, or if you're using Notepad, you can open that up as well. And what we're going to do is drag and drop our server bat file into the program, and this will allow us to edit it. So what are we going to put into this file? Batch scripting is a vast subject that we won't be able to cover in the scope of this video. So instead what I'm going to do is I'm going to provide all of the text that is needed for this file, and then we're going to step through each line with a descriptive explanation. We really want to understand what is going on inside of this file, because if we want to make changes to this file, we can do so without breaking it. If you don't understand what's going on, making changes will be very difficult, and it could end up breaking your batch file. Alright, this is everything we're going to need in order to start up our server, check back periodically if the server's running, and if it's not, we'll start it again. And it'll keep looping through this process until we exit the program. So let's step through each line to kind of see how all this works. So echo off just means that while the program is completing its task, it doesn't produce any output, so it doesn't junk up our terminal with a bunch of unneeded text. We turn this off just to kind of keep things clear. Now, our set local enabled delayed expansion. Since this is looping through and continuously looping through, the value of some of these variables are going to change. So like our error level, this variable will change depending on where we are in our loop. And in order to make sure that we get the most up-to-date variable information, we need to enable delayed expansion. Now we can set our variables. We can use the word set. What is a variable? Basically, a variable is a name that we designate, hopefully descriptive enough to let you understand what it does, and we assign that a value. And in this case, the value of that named server path is the path to our server. So how do we get the path to our server? Well, let's open up the root of our DayZ server directory. Inside here, you will see a folder at the top. You can click that and it will extend this name, and that's the absolute path of our server. We can copy that and paste it into the value. So now this is saying then this name, server path, holds the value, the path to our server. So when we come down here, we need to reference the path to our server. We don't have to type out user, sleep, desktop, DayZ server. Instead, we can just type out server path. And we also know what it's doing because it's just descriptive enough to tell us that we need the server path here. And that's all a variable is going to do. Let's make it easier for us to type this out and organize things. And so we're going to set the other two variables, one for executable, and you can find that executable inside the root of our directory. And that's this file right here, our application file. So we can copy that text over and place it into the value, which I've already done here. And the next variable is our server config, and this can also be found in the same place. And you can copy this over and place it into the value here. Now, to understand why we need this next line, check server, we need to understand kind of how this program executes its tasks. It reads everything from top to bottom, and it executes its tasks in that order. So it will first echo off, it will set delayed expansion, it will set all of our variables, and then we'll move down to our check server. And then we'll start executing all of the tasks under check server. And keep moving down to start server, and so on and so forth, until we interrupt that. And we use these as checkpoints. So check server is considered a checkpoint. And we can move back and forth to those checkpoints using words like go to. So go to start server, instead of moving us down into this next line, it's going to move us to the start server checkpoint, which is right here. And then it will start executing tasks under that checkpoint. And if we want to start this checkpoint over again, we can just move back to the top saying go to check server, which instead of moving us down into the start server, will move us back up to check server. and it'll keep looping through this process. Now, the first task we want to do is make sure that our server is up and running. To do that, we need to open our task list. Task list is a program on your computer that lists all tasks currently running. Then we can use /fi to apply a filter that we designate. And that filter is image name equals server exe. And what this is saying is that in this task list there are a list of image names, and we want to find the one that is equal to the name of our server exe. And then this 2 greater than null just means we don't want to collect any output. And we take all this information right here and we pipe that into a find function. And this find function has a couple of parameters. This /i means that we need to be case sensitive, and this /n means that we put this in a long format and we don't collect any output. Now we need to check what this function returns. It's going to give us an error level, and that error level can be a value of 0 or greater than 0. And we know that if the value is greater than 0, that we have an error. So we can say if our error level does not equal 0, then we know that the server is not up and running, and we can communicate that to the user. We do that by saying echo. We can print out to the console, the server is not running, relaunching now. In the next line we're going to move to start server. So we'll say go to start server. That'll allow us to start up our server. But before we get into the details of that checkpoint, we need to also check to see what happens if this error level does equal 0. So if it does equal 0, we want to tell the user that the server is up and running. And we also want to set a timer for 60 seconds so we can check again. To do that, we will add a timeout. A /t will give us the ability to set a value 60 seconds. And /nobreak means that we will not be able to interrupt this with keystrokes. After that, we're going to clear off our screen and we're going to loop back up to the top. So we'll check this process again. Alright, now moving on to our start server checkpoint. Once we reach this start server checkpoint, we're going to want to clear our screen just to keep things organized. And then we'll want to cd, and this means to change directories. And we want to change our directory using the /d, which will allow us to move into any directory on any drive. And the directory we want to move into is the server path. So essentially this line is saying change the directories from any drive to our server path. Once our program is in our server path, then we can start the program. We need to start that program, and we also need to feed in all of the launch parameters. And so the first parameter is the server's name, the name of the executable, the name of the configuration, the port number that we are using, the profiles that we are using, any mods that we would like to add, which we're not adding mods today. We've got a separate video for that. And then we've got the freeze check. This will automatically remedy any freezes that happen. It will try to. I won't say it will succeed. And then we also have logs that keep track of information like what the players are doing, what the admins are doing, and the net information. And after that, the server will start up, and we know that it's up, so we can go to check server, and we can start this whole process over again. And we'll keep looping through that. Keep saying if our error level does not equal 0, then the server's not up. If it does equal 0, the server is up. Let's wait 60 seconds to check again. And if the server is not up, we are going to start the server. We'll move into the server path. We'll start the server with these launch parameters, and we'll start the process over again. Alright, now that we're done with our batch script and we have a good understanding of it, let's get a better understanding of our server directory. These are all the files and folders inside of our server directory, and we'll start with our add-ons folder. Inside of this folder you will find all of our packed Bohemia objects, or PBO. And a PBO is essentially holds all of the code, the models, the textures, all the information needed to create all the objects in the game, all of the world data, sounds, structures, everything like that. These are very important. This is what our entire game is made out of. And each of these PBOs is signed by the developer, and this is a sort of security feature. So each of these PBOs, in order to activate, needs a key for this signature. And we'll go into detail about that in just a sec. Our next folder is our BattleEye folder. It's mostly used on servers for remote connection, or RCON. And you can do things like start, restart, stop the server. You can check player count, different things like that. You can build tools that will interface with your server. And this docs folder just contains legal notices and EULA. Don't really need to get into that. The DTA folders, more PBOs. I'm guessing these are related to things like the user interface. And our keys folder. This is what each of those PBO signatures require to work. So without this by key, we cannot activate any of the PBOs, and so our game would not work at all. So these are very important. And logs. These are text files that will provide us with information regarding our logging. Our multiplayer mission. This is the folder you will spend the most time in as a server admin. This is how we completely customize our DayZ server. We are going to be launching a vanilla server, so we will not be diving into this folder today, or in this video, I'm sorry. A video released alongside this will contain all of the information needed to add mods, customize your server, and everything that goes on inside of here. Moving on, we got our Sakal folder. This is a folder added in 1.26 that contains all of our Sakal information, so all the PBOs and signatures that were needed to build out Sakal. And we'll go back up. Our server manager. This is where Bohemia has provided us with a bunch of examples and README text that is going to provide information to get our server started. It also contains a PowerShell script that will allow this server to run on our computer. Then we have a ban text. This text file will host any Steam IDs of players that you want to ban. So if they have a Steam ID inside of this documents, they will not be able to connect to the server. This project file is likely related to the software used to create all of these files and folders, likely a project folder, some kind of code editor. This is our server executable and our DayZ settings. This DayZ settings is related to video settings and things like that, and how your job system is set up, how many cores you've got, threads you're going to use, things like that, and a lot of video and graphic settings. And we'll move on to our configuration. And this is very important, and we're going to need to set up before we can launch our server. This holds all of the information that is plugged into our server bat in order to start the launcher. So if we open this inside of Visual Studio, Bohemia's done a great job with providing us with comments to let us know what everything does, so we don't need to sit here and take wild guesses. What you're going to do is you're going to want to name your server. I'm going to name mine Sleepy's Tutorial. Now we have a name for our server. You can assign it a password, admin password, descriptions. This is going to go in the description section of the client's server browser, just like it says. We got whitelist, max players. We don't change the verify signatures, so we don't want people to join with malicious PBOs that have not been verified. We also want to force the same build, which means that anyone without the correct mods or things like that will not be able to connect to the server as well. Disable VON, which is voice over network. We do not want to disable voice over network. And voice over network code quality, just essentially is saying that the higher the value, the better quality, but it could also lead to performance issues. So we kind of play around with that. Share ID. This is a way for you to share your server ID in order to get people to connect to your private server without having to go through the server launcher. And we can do things like disable crosshairs, disable third person, disable personal light, lighting config, system time, time acceleration, and all of these other things. The most important one in this file is really just getting your name. If you want passwords, you can do so. You'll want to change any of these other values how you see fit. The most important one is which mission you're going to be launching. And so this right here, this line right here, is going to launch our Chernarus server. And that is because if we open back up our missions folder, multiplayer missions, we have options for which mission we want to launch. And so we can do Chernarus, Enoch is for Livonia, and then the new map is Sakal. So depending on which server that you want to run will be dependent on what goes inside this line. And so when the server starts, this line tells it to start the Chernarus map. And that's it for the server configuration. I can exit out of that, and we'll move back up and go down to, we don't need to know what's inside of there because we already know. These DLLs are basically, DLL stands for Dynamic Linking Library, and it's just a way for Steam to plug in its API and allow us to connect back and forth, connect information back and forth. The last thing on our list is our whitelist, and this is a list of the players, and the players in this list are the only ones that can connect to your server. Anyone not in this list would not be able to connect to your server. That allows you to have a more private server. And that's pretty much it for our server directory. Alright, the next thing on our agenda is our firewall settings. By default, our computer does not want to communicate with our ports. It's a security feature. So we want to open these ports and give them rules inside of our firewall settings. So we will go to Windows Defender, and Windows Defender Firewall, and we can open up our advanced settings. Make sure you have administrative privileges, and you will see that we can add inbound rules and outbound rules. And we will need to add these rules to the ports that we will be using. The port that we will be using for our server is 2302. There's a large number of available ports to you. You'll have to Google which ones are available because some ports are not available. In our case, 2302 will be available for you, so that's the one we will use. We also need the Steam query port, which is 27016, and that allows us to communicate back and forth with Steam. And it gives us things like our player count, the server's name, and all of that information that is needed in order to launch the server from the launcher. So here we're going to add a new rule. We'll go over here, click New Rule, and this is going to be a port rule. So we'll highlight port, go to Next, and define either TCP or UDP. And these are different types of protocols that our that information can be passed through. And we are going to need to open up a port for both TCP and UDP. So first we'll do a TCP port, and this will be port 2302. That is our server port. We'll click Next. We are going to allow the connection. Next. Through all of these, the rules apply everywhere. Next, and we give this a name. We'll say DayZ server port 2302, and this is a TCP port. And it allows us to be descriptive and know what we're doing without having to scroll all the way through the text. And finish. And now it will populate it in the list right here. And now we can add another rule for our UDP. So we can click this, do another rule. It's going to be a port rule, just like before. This time we're going to select UDP for port 2302. We'll click Next, allow the connection. Through all of these rules apply. And we'll name this one UDP. So DayZ server port 2302 UDP, and finish. Now we have a UDP and TCP port rule for 2302. Now we need to add one for our Steam query port. So now we have both of our ports open up on our TCP and UDP. Now this is only for our inbound rules. That is only for information coming in can connect to these ports. And we also need to do the exact same thing for our outbound rules. And so we will start by doing port 2302. New rule. This is a port. Next. TCP 2302. Next. Allow the connection. That's the only difference here, is that we are allowing the connection. Next, next, and name this. TCP. And finish. Now fast forward through the rest of these. We already know what we're going to be doing. And there we go. Now all of our firewall settings are complete. And we can exit out of here. Okay, the next thing on our agenda is to tell our router to allow these ports to communicate. And this is called port forwarding. Now this is the part where it hangs up the most people. They have the most trouble with this because I can't explain exactly how to do this on your router, because there are so many different routers, there are so many different ways to do this. The best advice I can provide you is to call your internet service provider. If you have a major internet service provider, they should be able to walk you through getting this done or help you get it done themselves. When I first did this, I had trouble, and so I called my internet service provider, and they were able to walk me through this process. So if your internet service provider cannot help you, you will need to try and do this yourself. And I will try and explain this in a general way that will allow you to do this yourself. I can't be specific, but I can only be specific to my router. So if you want to log into your router, you're going to need to find your default gateway. To find your default gateway, you need to open a command prompt. To find a command prompt, you can just type command in the search bar and open up the command prompt. Inside this command prompt, we're going to type ipconfig and enter, and this will bring up our default gateway. And if we copy this number into a browser, then we can log into our router. Now my router specifically will look like this. It will have all of this information. I will not be prompted to log in first. Only once I click on one of these tabs will it prompt me to log into my router. You may be greeted with a login prompt, and you will need to provide the password. The password is generally admin, so I would start there. If you cannot find the password, you just have to call your internet service provider, and they'll be able to help you with that. So inside of this router, there should be a section called, mine in this case is called remote access. It may say something about port forwarding, it may say something different. You're just going to have to kind of look through your router settings to find a section related to port forwarding. And just like in our firewall settings, you're going to need to set this port to be communicated on UDP protocol and TCP protocol. And we're going to do that for both ports 2302 and 27016. Now, this is about as much information as I can provide because I can't step through this process specifically, as each person is different. So I wish you luck, and hopefully you can get this worked out. There are a lot of information online, like the documents for your router. So if you just Google your router, you should be able to find more information on how to do this. Alright, we are all ready to start our server. Now, once our server starts, we're going to populate new folders into this directory. Most of the folders you won't need to know. The one you do need to know about we'll go into after the server starts and after it's populated. So let's go ahead and double click on our serverstart.bat and watch what happens. And here we got the console window popped up. And we started launching our server. And we can go here, we'll expand this so we can kind of read it. And it's reading our mission folder, and initializing all of the stuff inside. And it's going to pump out a lot of new input. None of the stuff you really have to worry about. It's just initializing all of the loot and everything that needs to go in its proper place. And once it is done booted up, it will enter into a save state. That kind of sends it into a standby. And we wait for players to join. So right now we are up and running. And you can check this by opening up your DayZ. Going to your servers and checking our LAN. And here we are. We got Sleepy's tutorial up and running. We have a server. Congratulations. Alright, now that our server has been launched, it has populated new folders in our directory. Most of these folders you won't need to pay much attention to as they won't be used. Mostly what you're going to be using is your profiles folder. This is going to be where all of your logs end up, and also any configurations for any mods you install. They all end up inside this folder. Alright, so let's move back up. The other folder you're going to need to pay attention to is inside your missions. And depending on which mission you chose, in our case we chose Chinar's Plus, so we'll click on this one. It will populate a new storage_1 folder. Now what this folder does is it holds all persistent information in the server. So when the server goes back down, it reads this folder, so when it comes back up, it puts everything back exactly how it was. And that includes base structures, player positionings, the loot that the players have on them, anything stashed, things like that. And basically this is a way for us to wipe our server. So all you have to do to wipe your server is just delete this file. It would have nothing to read, and so it would repopulate with a fresh build. And that is pretty much all you're going to need to know as far as these new folders go. Now, let's talk about updating our server. So at the beginning of the video, we told you that you needed to move your server from the directory where it was originally located and put it into a new location. And this is because DayZ tends to overwrite files that we have changed, and so to prevent that from happening, we moved it. But what happens when we need to run an update? Well, let's check it out. DayZ's got an update that needs to be ran today. So what we'll do is we will open up our Steam. We can go to our library and find our DayZ server. And right now it's ready to be updated. So we'll go ahead and update it. Now that our server has been updated, we need to locate the updated files. So we'll right click, go to manage, and browse local files. So now that we have the updated files, we need to transfer them over to where our server is located. Now, we do not want to change any of our multiplayer mission files. We also do not want to change any of our keys in case we have mods downloaded. We do want to update everything else. So what we're going to do is you can hit Control, and you will be able to individually select these folders. And so I'll select my add-ons folder, BattleEye, Docs, DTA, Call, Server Manager, and all of these as well. And then we can Control C these, and we can move over to our server directory, and we can paste these in. And when we paste these in, it's going to prompt us that there are some duplicate files. We want to replace the files in this destination, and we hit replace files. Now, to keep in mind that DayZ does sometimes update its multiplayer missions, and so these values will change inside of these files. Our values are also inside of these files when we go to customize them. So we don't want the DayZ to overwrite them. So if you want to apply the changes that DayZ has made, you will need to compare these files in an editor. That will allow you to see what has changed and then make those changes yourself if you'd like to. We don't need to make any changes because we're keeping everything vanilla. And there you go. That's how you update your server. Alright, well that concludes our video tutorial. I hope that you're able to get your server up and running. I hope everything works out for you. If you have any issues or questions or anything like that, you can drop them in the comment section, or you can join our Discord. That link will be in the description. Consider subscribing, as we will be doing more video tutorials in the future. Well, I'm sleepy, and it's time for me to take a nap.